Hey, this is Cassie with MyCounselor.Online, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Melissa Abellio, one of our amazing therapists, about an article she wrote, Out of Control Teens and Tweens, which I think a lot of us can relate to. So, Melissa, thank you so much for coming on today and being with me and being willing to chat about your article.
Thanks, Cassie, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So I think about teenagers a lot like toddlers. Like, they are both in this state of life where they are trying to assert their independence, but they don't really have all the tools or the emotional development ready for that. And yet they're constantly telling their parents, I'm ready, and I just want you to leave me alone. And parents, I think, can feel so exasperated and so overwhelmed, and just, they want to believe that, okay, well, fine, I'll leave you alone, you do your thing. So what do you think about that? Are they ready to be left to their own devices as a preteen, teenager, or do they still need mom and dad in the picture to help boundary that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cassie. Well, I definitely think they need mom and dad still, mostly because research says that their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet. And your prefrontal cortex is where all of our logic is. So
Okay.
to make, logical decisions. And so since that's not fully developed yet, they definitely need mom and dad, of course. We know this logically, but even like physiologically, it would make sense that they would still need somebody who does have a developed prefrontal cortex to give them reasonable limits and boundaries.
Yes.
And I think that's really the key, is reasonable limits. And yeah.
Yeah. So that's so interesting about the prefrontal cortex. Literally, it's just not physiologically developed. And I think that makes so much sense as far as what we see with our teenagers and the challenges they're in. What are some of the common problems, some of the common things parents of teenagers, they come to your office, and what are some things that they are struggling with their teen, things you hear often?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cassie. I think what I hear a lot is that parents are struggling with their either teenage daughter or son just having disrespectful attitudes.
Gotcha.
Maybe being self-absorbed.
Okay.
General.
A little lazy, a little like entitled.
A little. Sometimes as well, just lying about the activities that they're participating in, whether that's in or outside of the home, whether that has to do with like pornography use or that has to do with
alcohol
and drugs. Exactly. Yeah, and I think a huge one that I see, especially in the Christian population that I'm working with, is a giant concern around the use of masturbation and pornography. Gotcha. And sexual relationships,
yeah.
The opposite sex or even with the same sex.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. And, from a mom's heart, those things are so tremendous. We feel so overwhelmed when I talk about that with my husband, with our own kids and these things that they bring up, our foster and adopted kids. He just reminds me, like, Cassie, remember you were a teenager. Like, remember it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. A lot of reassurance, like, to the parents. And then you talk about boundaries in your article. You talk about, you reference Dr. John Townsend's book about boundaries with teens, a great resource. And you talk about some of the boundaries, like one of them that you mentioned is separateness. And I just want to quote you on this because I love this quote. It says, "This is where you decide to let go of making it your responsibility to make them happy. Instead, you focus on creating an atmosphere where their true happiness is possible." Talk about that, because I thought that was so good, and I just want to hear you unpack it a little.
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes parents, especially when their teens are getting older, there's a huge sense of like personal responsibility they carry for how they're child is acting or reacting, like they feel that it's actually like their fault that their child is acting or reacting in XYZ way.
So maybe not.
So it's possible that, you know, that the child themselves is making their own decisions and having their own thoughts and feelings, that they're actually separate people from the parent. They're not an extension of the parent. It's not to say that the parent isn't responsible for creating an atmosphere and setting boundaries for the child that are healthy and appropriate, but there is no longer this you know, you're an extension of me as a person. And so I think that's one concept that I think is really challenging for parents. They just feel a sense of like shame and guilt when it comes to whatever it is that their teen is doing or not doing, and feel very, very like, what am I doing wrong that my teen would think this or feel this? I think that's a common, you know, there's just a lot of guilt and shame that come with whatever it is that their child's interacting in. And so being able to have their identity be separate from their child, I think is really important, so that they're not reactive in nature with their child, that they're able to like process through what they're feeling and thinking, and then make decisions that are best for the teen with what boundaries they're going to set. I think if they're not able to separate themselves in that situation, it's going to make it really difficult not to be reactive. And then also, I think some parents will maybe swing the other way. Instead of being reactive, they will kind of be overly permissive.
Yeah. Back to that beginning thing, the kid says, I don't need you. They're like, maybe you don't. I hope you don't, because I'm so tired by this point.
Yes. And as you can see, that's still a struggle with like identity. Like, I'm not doing something right if they're not happy. And so then there's this like overly permissive nature that I need to make them happy so that I'm doing a good job, or so that I'm okay. I'm being a good parent. I'm a good mom or dad.
Yeah. And then talking about.
Okay. Sorry.
No, yeah. So talking about this boundary thing, you mentioned that it's important to really, as a parent, think through what your boundaries actually are. What actually is important to you? What are you willing to put your time and energy into making sure your kids understand boundaries, that it's not okay if they cross? You know, we all hear the don't make a mountain out of a molehill, or this isn't a hill to die on, or, you know, pick your battles. So you talk about having clear written boundaries so that you can both reference them. And you say that, and I thought this was so good and so interesting, your teen doesn't have to agree. And why is that?
Well, I think that, you know, the parent is still the authority over the child, and therefore the teen doesn't have to agree necessarily with the boundaries that are set, as long as they're reasonable.
Yeah.
As long as the parent can establish that they're reasonable for their age, that they're under their roof still.
Which makes total sense. And I just love hearing you say that, because I think parents, sometimes they just need to hear from a professional, that's okay. Like, it's going to be a fight with their teenagers about that.
So it is definitely going to be a fight.
But that doesn't mean that they're in the wrong, or that that's unreasonable, or that's unfair to their child. They have to be willing to stand firm even when they are going to get pushback.
Yes, absolutely.
And I loved you talked about honesty about these boundaries, about how when a boundary is crossed, a parent needs to go to the child honestly. Why is it so hard to do that sometimes? To just confront your child when they cross the boundary and deal with it?
That's a really good question, Cassie. You know, I think it just depends on the situation, probably for certain parents. I think it could be a myriad of different things. I think part of it might be just that the parent may struggle relationally big time with the child. They don't have a connection established. You know, so it's challenging for them to confront the child because there isn't a previous relationship that's really close and connected, and therefore when they're trying to approach, you know, the child, they feel like they're constantly the bad guy, like they don't have any relationship outside of setting these boundaries. So it makes it challenging for the parent to go to the teen. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I see. And then I think too, it could be a parent, you know, feeling fearful that they're gonna their anger will get the best of them.
Yeah.
And that instead of processing through that anger, right, and processing through what they're feeling prior to going to the child, they just kind of avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't want to blow up, you
Yeah.
know.
That relationship piece, you know, a big piece of this article is about that relationship piece and how, you know, maybe a parent has never established a true heart-to-heart connection with their kids because they've just been like leading their kids from more of an authoritarian standpoint. Now their kids are teenagers and mom and dad are like, you're going to do this. And the kids are like, I don't have to. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
And so it's so powerful, I think, in developing that relationship. Talk just a little bit about how developing a heart connection with a teenager is different than developing a heart connection with a smaller child.
Yeah, that's a great question, Cassie. I think with a smaller child, the way kids connect is very different than the way a teen would connect.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that children connect, usually, especially younger, like is through exploratory play. You know, you connect with them through wrestling and word touch.
Yeah.
And then as they get older and they develop a prefrontal cortex a little bit more, there's more, yeah, a little bit more, not completely, but a little bit more. There's more like conversation before bed, even about, okay, how was your day? You know, how did school go today? What happened? You know, that's usually the time when a lot of kids end up opening up. And so that's a little bit different from then transitioning to a teenager where their interests are very different. And I think that's a lot more difficult because a lot of times the parent is not interested in what the teen is interested in.
Yes.
And so the parent has to figure out ways to connect with the child in a way that's interesting to them, and develop conversation around doing what is interesting to the teen. Yeah. And I think that's a lot different than connecting through playing together.
Yes.
You know? And so it's a lot more complex because teens don't always want to share their deepest, darkest secrets with mom or dad. The second
wise man draws it out, right?
Yes. A man of understanding draws it out, and I think it does take a lot of time and consistency for that to occur, for that environment to occur.
Especially if it's never been the case in the past.
Exactly.
You know, it hasn't been, but there's hope in that. You know, that's what God wants for that relationship. And so parents can be confident, right, that God is on their side to help them connect with their child around that. And when God is on your side, there's hope.
Yes, there is, Cassie. And I think that's a huge thing, parents, when they feel like, man, I failed. Like they get to, you know, like upper middle school ages and they're like, I failed, it's too late.
So hard.
And it's just not too late.
Yes.
At all for them. I mean, they can start investing time consistently, you know, spending time with their teen, and that it can change.
Yeah.
It's definitely an uphill climb, but it is possible. It's not too late. It's never too late for that to happen.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much for being with me today and for writing this article and sharing. And for those of you watching, hopefully this was encouraging and informative to you. For more things that Melissa has written, you can check out her stuff at MyCounselor.Online.